Welcome, Minister Nash, and welcome back to the MPI team. So change of topic this time, we're on to fishing. So I'll give you a few minutes to, if you want to present to us, and then I'm sure Ian McKelvey and others have got questions for you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm assuming you know Ray Smith because he's been sitting here for
an hour and a half. Yeah.
And you probably know Dan Bolger, who is Head of Fisheries New Zealand. Thank you very much. With your indulgence, Madam Chair, I'll just make a few notes as mentioned. The fishing and aquaculture industries were able to operate as an essential business through COVID-19 lockdown period. I'd like to acknowledge the industry's huge and successful efforts to keep their people safe during this period, and also those who had to tie up their boats for the good of their fellow Kiwis. I'd also acknowledge and thank those Kiwis who so willingly stayed at home when they would rather been out fishing with their friends and family. Not least, I'd like to recognise those who worked for their communities during this period. For example, Ngāti Kahungunu, who provided healthy kaimoana to many people who needed it during lockdown. I'm assuming Ngāi Tahu did the same. The effects of the efforts to deal with COVID-19 remind us that our fisheries and seafood are important to everyone. We all know someone who goes out fishing for fun or to catch a feed. More than 700,000 Kiwis fish each year, spending more than $1 billion in the rec sector. The commercial fishing and aquaculture industries bring significant benefits to the country, providing jobs and opportunities for thousands of people, with export returns forecast to break the $2 billion mark next year. Tangata Whenua view fisheries and the marine environments that sustain them as precious taonga, which must be maintained for future generations. And of course, our fisheries are important for their own sake. Their abundance and diversity are part of what makes this place home. Now we are faced with new challenges and new opportunities. We don't know how markets will recover from the current turmoil, but we do expect that people around the world will continue to seek out high quality seafood that is produced sustainably and transparently. Their expectations will only increase, and so must our performance. The vast majority of our fish come from sustainably managed stocks, but there are some that are under pressure. The unwanted effects of fishing, including accidental capture of non-targeted fish species, marine mammals and birds, continues to be a challenge. At the same time, consumer and citizen expectations about sustainability and protection for the environment are evolving. Over my time as a Minister of Fisheries, I've met with Tangata Whenua, a broad range of people from all three fishing sectors, as well as environmental advocates. While their outlook may differ in some respects, sometimes wildly, they ultimately all want the same thing: enough fish in the water now and in the future. My vision is abundant and sustainable fisheries, thriving communities, and a healthy marine environment for the benefit of all New Zealanders. There is a sufficient work program of work underway to achieve this, and we have made good progress. One of my visions also is that we are acknowledged globally as having the best fisheries in the world. And I'm happy to talk about that and expand on that if anyone would be keen for me to do that a little bit later. One part of how we're going to do this is better monitoring of the fishery. The rollout of electronic catch and position reporting through 2019 has enabled us to track the position of the entire commercial fleet in real time, and then get daily information on fish catches and protected species interactions. This data has already been put to good use and will provide opportunities to innovate on how we manage our fisheries in the future. To recognise the danger faced by Maui dolphins, all trawl and set net vessels operating between 2 and 7 nautical miles in their core habitat between Northland and Taranaki are required to carry an observer. There's been 100% observer coverage of these vessels, even during the government's response to COVID-19. In addition, onboard cameras have been installed on 20 set net and trawl vessels operating throughout the fisheries management areas between Northland and Taranaki. This has been going on since November 2019, and this represents the majority of set net and trawl effort in that area. In the meantime, stakeholders, iwi, and public have provided feedback on a set of proposals to further strengthen and expand the protection for hectares and Maui dolphins, and the government is considering this plan, which will have long-reaching positive effects on these national taonga. We're taking a phased approach to the rollout of cameras across the rest of the commercial fleet to ensure we can properly address the technical challenges and that New Zealanders and affected stakeholders have a chance to have their say on specific proposals. It is critical that we get the implementation of cameras on boats right, and it cannot be rushed. When it is in place, the benefits for managing our fisheries will be significant, and I also believe that the the brand benefits accruing from going overseas and marketing our seafood from one of the most sustainably managed fisheries in the world will add significant value. Life above the water has also been the focus this year. The Minister of Conservation and I approved the National Plan of Action for Seabirds in May this year. This offers better protections for seabirds and has a vision that New Zealanders work towards zero fishing-related seabird mortalities. Among other measures, the plan requires all fishing vessels at risk of accidentally catching seabirds to create risk management plans for protected species. These plans will be audited and regularly monitored against government standards. My officials have also worked together with their counterparts in the Department of Conservation to develop a 5-year work program to recover New Zealand sea lions. This year, we have achieved 91% observer coverage of fishing vessels operating in the Auckland Islands where these sea lions live, and there were no reported captures, a great result. In terms of fisheries science, decades of work by scientists, fisheries managers and stakeholders from all fishery sectors has built strong foundations of our fishery system. The science is telling us that when it comes to fish in the water, our fisheries are in good shape overall. About 94% of fish of known status come from fisheries where sustainability is not a concern, and we have plans to bring the remaining fisheries back to sustainable levels. Of course, we will always want to be better, and I'm confident that we are moving in the right direction. Finally, let me talk about aquaculture. Last year, I launched a new government strategy for aquaculture. As a country, we have a huge opportunity to accelerate the sustainable growth of this sector. The strategy sets out a pathway for sustainable growth, and my vision is that New Zealand is globally recognised as a world leader in sustainable and innovative aquaculture management across the value chain. Achieving this vision means building on our successes and embracing new opportunities. On that note, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I was just going to give you a slight observation of someone who was locked down on the coast that the seagulls sustained themselves quite well without chips. Ian McKelvey.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. You said there's technical difficulties with the introduction of cameras, and you've had 3 years of practice resolving those technical difficulties. Would you like to explain what they are and why they're so difficult?
Yeah, sure. There's a little bit of background. There's about 2,000 fishing boats globally with cameras on board. So there is no fishery anywhere that has had a full implementation of cameras. And what I do say, quite glibly, but you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's more than a matter of just sticking a GoPro on a masthead and waiting for the film to roll. What we have done is put a proof of concept out in the Maui fishery area. There's 20 boats with cameras on at the moment. We paid for that. The cost of that was about $35,000 per fishing vessel. Personally, I think that is incredibly high, and I think if we were to roll this out across the fleet, it would not be that high. But what we were doing is trialing cameras to see if we get the systems right, to see what we needed to do. And keep in mind, certainly at this point in time, asking fishermen and women to stump up with $35,000 each to implement these cameras, I think would be prohibitive. But there are a number of technical issues. First of all, these cameras are operating in very harsh environments. These boats, I should say, are operating in very harsh environments a lot of the time, and cameras need to be robust enough to be able to deal with that. The second is getting the data back to base. So at the moment, what happens is it's on hard drive, that is couriered back to Fisheries New Zealand, and all that information is viewed at fast point. And at this point, I must say, what they're looking for is capture of dolphins, basically. We haven't found any of that, but again, there are issues around data. What was that, sir?
They don't exactly catch many, so you're going to be looking for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. But part of this, this was, first of all, a step around the Maui Dolphin Protection Plan. And so we wanted to be sure that, in fact, no dolphins were being caught. But the other thing we wanted to be sure of in this fishery, because it is the most identified as the most high-risk fishery across all fisheries, because there's only about 60 Maui dolphin left. But we also need to, it's not only the cameras on the boats, it's also what we do with the data, how we store the data, how we view the data, and the capacity to actually store the data. One thing I will say is that technology is moving at a great rate of knots. And I'm probably going to get the technical term wrong. Well, it's not a technical term, there probably is a technical term, but artificial intelligence is progressing at a great rate of knots. For example, the ability to facially recognize fish. And again, I don't know if that is the right term, but we're nearly there. And I see a time in the not too distant future where artificial intelligence will actually be responsible for analyzing all the data that comes in. So, I see a time in the not too distant future where what will happen is nearly every fishing vessel in our fleet will have a camera on. That data will be transmitted electronically to shore. Artificial intelligence will go through that, and it won't just be looking for Maui dolphins or Hector's dolphins or seabirds. It will also be able to analyse the fish that are caught by that fisher person, and that will back up the reports we're getting from the fishermen themselves. But Mr. McKelvey, for me, that's only part of the story around cameras. So you got the compliance arm. For me, the other part of the story is actually going out to global markets with a really powerful sustainability story, where anyone, anywhere around the world, when they're buying fish with a Caught in New Zealand brand on it, will know that they are buying fish from the most sustainably managed fishery in the world. And cameras, I think, is a very important part of that. The last thing I'll say with regard to that is I was talking to a guy who actually is highly advanced and has a fantastic reputation in innovative camera technology. I won't tell you who, because what he's doing is a little bit confidential at this point. But he's working on a camera system at the moment where you put it on a boat, and the fish that are caught can be viewed by a diner in a high-end restaurant that can order a groper teriyaki fish anyway, and they'll put on these glasses and they will see the journey of that fish from the sea to their plate. So we're at the very early stage of camera technology at the moment.
Minister, you've spent 15 minutes nearly telling us nothing.
Oh, really? I thought I was.
The challenge for me is that there's a good
Mr.
yourself. There are
McKelvey.
already a number of fishing boats.
This is another Kelly we
Who voluntarily install cameras on their boats. I've got no issue with it. I think the real issue is that this has been delayed for nearly 4 years, in fact, more than 4 years now, and the public had no explanation for the delay. And I think that we need to get an answer from you as to why we cannot. And I accept the piece about storage of data. You don't need to store the data. You only need to store the relevant data, and the relevant data will be very small.
Well, when we talk about relevant data, I mean, what we're not envisaging is that as soon as the fishing vessel steams out of port and then back again, we don't envisage that the camera is rolling 100% of the time. What we're looking at is the camera would roll under certain circumstances. For example, when the winches are operating or when they're trawling at a certain speed. So it'll be smart technology that knows when either the net is coming up or when the vessel is operating in a way that may yield information. The other thing I would say, and I don't mean to throw you under the boat, Dan, under the bus or the boat or off the side, whatever the fishing analogy is.
Well, you're not going to drop yourself there.
But when the previous government actually put in place a camera regime, the technology was just not ready for that. So no matter what had been put in place by the previous government, it just would not have been ready to be implemented.
So can you quickly just answer a couple more? I don't want to stick on the camera.
Sure.
Are they're supplementaries, Ian?
Yes. They
Okay.
are. There's two other issues related to the cameras that interest me. One is that you said you intended to get camera technology operating. Will you operate it right across the fleet, or will you pick some bits of the fleet that don't necessarily need to run cameras on?
It's a good question. Before I answer that, I don't mean to digress. One other point I would like to make, that we have set up a technical working group at the moment that consists of NGOs, the sector and officials to look at these issues. But back to your point, what we've done is we've taken a risk-based approach to rolling out cameras across the fleet. So for example, power divers, for example, or lobster fishermen, you may say, that's low risk, so there's no point in putting a camera on a power diver vessel. So it is a risk-based approach to rolling cameras out across the fleet over a specified period of time. Now, we need to bed that down. So we're not envisaging that every single boat that leaves port to pick up any form of seafood will have a camera on board.
And lastly, I think that you could legitimately argue that the consumer and a fair portion of the industry want these things to be progressed, and yet they're not progressing.
No, I agree with your first statement. I think a large portion of consumers want this. I think our markets would benefit from this. We're working with sectors of the industry and they're not against this. It is just getting the technology right. And as mentioned, if it was as easy and as cheap as, I'm being glib again, but you know what I mean. If it was as easy and as cheap as literally putting a GoPro on a mast on a boat, then believe me, we would do it. It's simply not that easy. The technology doesn't exist in a way that allows us to do it in a cost-effective manner. But we are working, incredibly hard to get there, hence the reason why the technical working group is in place. But let me give you one example. When I made my decision around the Cherokee 3 and 4, Dan, this fishing year, I went to all of them because I'm very keen to work with the fleet on this. And I said, we need to come up with a way to rebuild the stock. But I said, would you agree in principle to have cameras on your boats? And apart from one, they all said yes. So I'm with you on this. I don't think the fishers are against cameras. There are issues we need to sort out. And that's why we've got this technical working group there. But it's just a matter of getting it to the stage where it is cost effective for not just the big guys who own the quota, but for all your little ace fishers who actually, they don't make much money, and imposing the cost as it stands at the moment of cameras, I think would be onerous.
Rena, you hit us up.
Just a quick sub on that. And, thank you, Minister. And I think it's prudent. You've followed a really good course to make sure the technology solution is right for the industry. I was fascinated by the possibilities of technology. Artificial intelligence and other things that you've mentioned. Do you see perhaps a role that that technology could place in terms of fisheries management decisions in the future?
Oh, very good point. Absolutely. Everything we're doing around electronic position reporting and catch reporting will allow us to make faster and better decisions because we'll have real-time information. Because at the moment, of course, what happens is we do all these scientific studies, it goes out, we go and consult, and the cost of undertaking a lot of the research needed to make these fisheries management decisions is huge. With real-time data coming in, we have the ability to be much more agile. But we talk about artificial intelligence. One of the challenges in fishing in a mixed fishery is you may have, ace for one stock, but not for another. But you end up pulling up fish that you haven't got ace for or quota for, and you end up paying what's called deemed values, which is a cost that you must pay for catching a fish that you haven't got the right to catch. But one thing that's being trialled at the moment is actually underwater camera technology. And the best way to describe it for farmers is like it's like a docking race, where let's say you got quota for snapper, but you haven't got quota or ace for Cherokee. So the snapper comes along, your net opens, into the net goes, Cherokee come along, the net closes, and the Cherokee don't come into that net. So artificial intelligence and technology is moving in a way that allows us to be much more selective in the fish we actually are catching. And that will, in terms of managing our fisheries and in terms of what the men and women are out there every day doing it, this will be hugely efficient. And it's as mentioned, it's going at a great rate of knots. It's fantastic to see.
Sure.
Mark Peterson.
Thank you, Minister. Look, I really welcome your emphasis on aquaculture, which in my view is the biggest single opportunity within our primary industries. But there is, a number of roadblocks in the way at the moment in terms of RMA and getting consent, particularly for the open ocean salmon farms and the like. So what's your perspective on this, and where do you see this going? In terms of,
Look, I'm a huge believer in the potential of open water aquaculture. In fact, we launched, is Matt Bartholomew here? Matt is our Director of Aquaculture. Have I got your title right? Yeah, and the team is doing fantastic work on this. So we launched a strategy, and the aim is for aquaculture revenues to be 3 billion by 2035. There are a number of challenges though. So at the moment, we don't have any deep water aquaculture. Or open water, I should say, aquaculture, for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a lot of research that needs to be done to determine where the best places are to locate open water aquaculture, because obviously you're dealing with with conditions that are a lot more variable than if you're in a bay, for example, like wave and sort of, The second thing is the cost at this point to use a layman's term, of the pens required for this is huge, is prohibitive. Having said that, there's a lot of work going on at the moment with regard to developing open water aquaculture strategy, and we're playing a really good part in this. Your leader himself outlined a couple of issues we've got to deal with, and the big one, I suppose, is consenting. At the moment, what we don't want is a mad rush where everyone goes in and just seeks a consent for a huge tract of water and locks up everything without it being available for other companies coming forward. So we need to just be aware of that. The aquaculture team under Matt released a fantastic NES around aquaculture. So I think this industry has huge potential. It really does. And this will be one of the drivers of value and growth in the whole fishery space.
The technology seems to be that, like Norway, this is a massive industry over there in comparison to ours. So it doesn't seem to be, the industry itself is saying that they want to get going on this. It's just the consenting that's holding them up.
Let me give you an example that Mr. Sitakatni will be well aware of. We're working with Ngāi Tahu at the moment to find suitable spots for aquaculture development. And that has taken, about 4 years, Mr. Sitakatni? A lot of time. And so it's simply not a matter of, that looks like a nice spot on a nice sunny day. It is understanding not only the benthic effects and the environmental effects, ecosystem effects, but it's also understanding the dynamics of the ocean where you're going to put this. Having said that, consenting for aquaculture is, it's not one of these things that's done overnight, because you do need to understand the ecosystem and the benthic effects that aquaculture is going to have on the environment. And I don't know, Matt, if you want to elaborate on that, or Dan, if you want to elaborate on that, but we do need to make sure we get this right. We are working with all key stakeholders in this. So as far as I'm aware, this isn't being held up because people disagree with each other. It's basically ensuring we actually get the science right.
Was that related to your sub?
Yeah, I've got a sub in relation to aquaculture.
Yep.
We just heard in the previous hearing with the Minister of Agriculture about potential for seaweed to be able to be used in feed on farm to reduce emissions. And that sort of opens up a whole possibilities of new aquaculture industries for our country. I'm just interested in, are you aware of some up and coming new species that could be under production, or I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities that the aquaculture industry are looking at. I'm just we've got fantastic world leading green shell mussels, obviously salmon, and perhaps we could add seaweed into the mix in the future.
I've read reports of this, and what I say to the Minister of Agriculture, the land that you can farm on. You've got your money for this. Now give us a decent pot of money to actually farm the land that we don't know that much about. I see, I'm not an expert in this area, I'll be honest, but I've read reports around seaweed being used as feed to reduce methane emissions. And it is really exciting. If the technology bears fruit, and I know we're still in the trial stage at the moment, and it's looking promising, then as you say, Mr. Sitakatni, this moves us into a whole new space in terms of potential, not only revenue, but also jobs, and another area where I think we can be world leading in this. But green lip mussels at the moment, it's not at the pharmaceutical stage, it's at the nutraceutical stage. But I think before too long, in the research that's being done in this, and there's a lot of really amazing and fantastic and innovative research, you could well see a lot of the green lip mussel extracts move from nutraceutical into pharmaceutical as we better understand the technology and the tests are done. Because to get to call something a pharmaceutical product, the tests required are very onerous for good reason. But aquaculture and the opportunities you talk about with seaweed, you know, the sky's the limit. It really is an exciting time.
Hopefully a bag at Pick and Save won't go up too high
Yeah,
for
well,
the mussels.
But you know, it's interesting you say that, because at the moment, you know, with hoki, you know, hoki is a valuable fish stock, but they're getting collagen off hoki skin, and you know that product is amazing. I think Kitty Allen uses it because look, she looks about 20 years younger than she is. But
Love this minister.
but the thing around this, but without being, but you do make a
Every time.
But the point made is very relevant. I don't mean to be glib, but the point made is very relevant. You may well find that the most valuable part of the hoki is the skin, not the fillet. So we need to be careful, and this is where we're doing a whole lot of work, that in fact we use the whole fish. So in the past, you know, we cut everything off and there's the fillet, the rest goes into fish meal. Now, skin, collagen, with the ling bladder, that's worth a fortune in China. So that's the real challenge. How do we use all the fish? Like, how do we use all the
Okay,
wild?
so Ian now has a sup, and then we're going to go to Kerry.
Would you like me to get you some collagen?
2 quick sups on the aquaculture. One is, given the rash of cash that the government's spraying around at the moment, is there any potential for
Your voters love
the government to add or inject some cash into the aquaculture system to create jobs, and given that you're sticking everywhere else? Is that going to happen?
Well, first of all, about 140 million from the Provincial Growth Fund has gone into 5 or 6 projects around aquaculture, and that's all the way from research through to infrastructure. The other thing is the primary sector ministers, myself, Minister Jones and Minister O'Connor, are working on a strategy that covers the whole primary sector. So an announcement will be made in due time, but all I will say is that all primary sector ministers and this government recognises the value of aquaculture as it stands, and certainly recognises the potential of aquaculture going forward.
And second quick stuff on the aquaculture thing, why haven't you progressed the salmon farm switches in the Maori Sounds? They clearly would create a whole lot of jobs. Why hasn't that been played?
No, and it's a very good point. As the member will possibly be aware.
That's a good point. I want the answer.
No, and I'll give you the answer, but it is a good question. You know, what happened is a couple of actually expert panels. There was an initial one and then a final expert panel assessed in the end 6 sites. They said 3 out of 6 were suitable, and we came in and said, "Yep, I get that." One of the big sites though that wasn't recommended is Mid-Waitata Reach. Okay, but what happened there is there were 3 reasons why they said that site was not suitable, but none of those reasons on its own was enough to stop it. But when you add them together, there was enough of a compelling reason not to recommend Mid-Waitata. So I went back to King Salmon and said, if you work with local iwi and other key stakeholders to mitigate each and every one of those risks, then we will certainly consider that. So my understanding at this point in time, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, is that King Salmon is working with local iwi to come up with a solution to make that work. So there is no barrier, I understand, it's been put in place by government at the moment. It's just iwi and King Salmon working to make it happen.
Minister, thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick note on aquaculture. My region in particular has been a major benefactor of your determinations and this government's investment into aquaculture, and it will have a transformative effect in the Pōtiki region. So I just want to acknowledge that. Secondly, over the weekend, and actually over a paua pie in Tokomaru Bay, I had...
Us one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I should. But I had a meeting with a chap called Bruce Holm, who's a commercial cray fisherman. And he's a commercial cray fisherman up in Tokomaru Bay. Now, we had a discussion about the impacts of COVID on his industry. Now, they were impacted right at the outset in in January. I think that linked with the Chinese New Year, but very quickly the gates came down on his industry. So he walked me through some of the impacts of that and talked about the confidence that they had as the international markets start to open up again. But can you walk me through a little bit, because it happened so early on? What did you and MPI and fisheries staff, how did you engage with the sector, and what happened at those preliminary stages? What supports were wrapped around?
Sure. So this was actually the fisheries, more specifically the lobster fishery, was the first rescue package that the government put in place. Because what happened is the lobster industry, crayfish industry, is very, very reliant on China and certainly Chinese New Year, and that's another discussion actually. But and obviously when China went into lockdown, that closed, bang, pretty much like that. And what happened is a number of licensed fish receivers had live crays on site, and also a number were being held in pens. And obviously there were men and women who had planned to go out and catch lobsters. So what we did is we very early on engaged in, and Dan's team, the Fisheries New Zealand team, did a fantastic job of identifying this, came into my office and we had a good talk with them. We looked at different proposals and I can't remember the section of the Fisheries Act, I do apologise, but under a certain section of the Fisheries Act at the moment, there are certain fisheries that are allowed to carry over 10% of their catch if they don't catch it in that fisheries year. Lobster is not one of those fisheries and the reason for that is because what people catch is pretty much exact. You know exactly what you're going to catch. But they came in and they asked us what we could do to help them. So we changed the regulations that allowed crayfish, the cray areas, fishery areas, to carry over 10%, with the condition that if I changed if I was going to drop the TACC, that wouldn't apply. But we allowed them to carry over 10%. The other thing we did is we said under certain circumstances, and that was by and large, they could vouch for the integrity of the biosecurity systems that have been put in place. We allowed them to release lobsters that they had already caught. And so certainly lobsters that were caught, that were being held in pens at sea, the efficacy of biosecurity was pretty solid in that. Even some of the licensed fish receivers, we said, if you can prove to us, because the last thing we wanted, of course, is a anemia outbreak or something where we had taken a lobster from one area, put it in another, and before we know it, we ended up with an outbreak. We allowed them to return those lobsters to sea as well. And that was done, as mentioned, we changed regulations. It was the first initiative that the government put in place. The other thing I will say, though, is that some lobster fisheries were really innovative in the way they did things. And certainly in my patch, Takatimu Seafood said, okay, what we are going to do is package up crayfish with other products in a really innovative way and offer them to the public. And that was actually really well received. So a lot of people who hadn't bought crayfish or ate crayfish were delivered it under, obviously, click and deliver scenario, because it was food. And we'll go, we remember in 2020, we asked you to diversify your markets, and what did you do about that? So we helped them in the immediate, and we would like to help them going forward in terms of market diversification.
So I guess that leads to my next question. Through the appropriation, fisheries has received additional funding. What for the COVID response, I think in particular, how has that funding been used and distributed, and what are the intended impacts, I guess?
Yeah, I'll talk very briefly and I'll throw it over to Dan, but about 8.1 million was put aside for rural and fishing communities. I think about 1.5 million, Dan, was put aside for fisheries.
About 4 over 4 years, roughly.
Yeah. The thing, I will say this, and I say this as a matter of pride, actually. Gone are the days when we make decisions and we say, live with it. And this is certainly, and this is a slightly long way of answering your question, but certainly when it comes to cutting TACC, that's totally allowable commercial catch, because we recognise every time we do that, or every time we impose a condition that makes it harder for that fisher to go out and catch fish, feed his family, service the community, then that is an imposition. So what we now do is we make these decisions, we communicate them, we certainly consult in a way that I don't think we've done in the past. But then what we do is we wrap a level of service around that fisherman to make sure that he or she and their family is coping. So a lot of this is actually about the health and well-being of fishers. So like I said, in the old days, it was, we're cutting your TACC or we're stopping you from fishing. Out you go. That's the way it is. Sorry, move on. Now, it's a lot more consultative, and the support we put in place to ensure that the mental health of these fishers is sound, I think is really important. And I'm really proud of the way that you know, fishers are seen as, you know, staunch guys, okay?
Yeah.
Popeye. But these guys, you know, they feel it just as much as anyone. So I'm really proud of the work we've done. Dan, I don't know if you want to
I'm
elaborate.
really
on that.
pleased to hear that. Did you have a comment? Because I've got 2 more questions. So
Well, very briefly, I guess,
Yeah.
you know, in the past, fisheries hasn't had the equivalent of what we've got in the farming sector with rural support trusts. So it hasn't been that kind of network. So that's probably the basic principle that we're looking at working up here as a fisher-led way of supporting each other, and we're using the funding to basically develop that over the period. And we've got some interim arrangements in place right now to provide support where it's needed.
fantastic. So we'll go to Mark and then Ian.
Minister, the vexed issue of marine reserves, and I know down where I am, the Southeast Marine Reserve is quite contentious with the, you know, the Crow and Power fishermen down there and recreational fishermen as well. Can you just give us a bit of an update on progress there, please?
Yeah, sure. That process has been going on for, I think, 7 or 8 years. It's a long and involved process. What happened is we had come up with a draft plan that went out to consultation pre-COVID. What happened is COVID obviously came along and put the kibosh on that consultation due to legislative requirements. We've had to start that consultation again under level 2. So that consultation is underway at the moment. And, you know, I'll wait and see what that consultation draws out before we'll make any decisions. One thing I will say is the process of developing marine protected areas is, I think, overly laborious. I mean, obviously, when you create a marine protected area, it can mean taking a fishery out of play. And, you know, I just briefly alluded to that can provide an imposition on men and women who make their living in this. So we need to be very careful in how we do things. We need to ensure that the consultation has integrity and is rigorous, and that we hear the views of everyone. And what I can say is that certainly as the Minister of Fisheries, the views of fishers I take very seriously. So down to the Southeast Marine Protected Area, consultation is due back, I think, Dan, must be about 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah, that'll be reviewed, and but no decision will be made before the election on that one.
Oh, you've answered that question.
So you had a new question, Ian?
I do.
Go.
Minister, are you satisfied with the outcome of the blue cod strategy and the recommended fishing limits that have come out of that strategy?
Yeah, it was heavily consulted, both with the rec and the commercial sector, and I think you know, we've landed in a good space. Why have you?
So can I ask a further question? Well, I'm not worried about the consultation. So what about the science behind that work? Is there adequate science put into that work, and do we understand the environment?
Look,
I might ask Dan to comment on the scientific side of it.
I haven't got the detail here, but yes, significant science went into it, and I guess I don't know. I know you comment on consultation, but actually, you know, there's the science that scientists do, and there's the information that all the fishers have, and the people who live in an area about what's actually happening. And the blue cod work in particular had very extensive engagement with the people who know what's happening on the ground as that was formed up. So yeah, we're pretty confident with the science behind that.
I suppose the reason it drives that question is when you look at the bag limit proposal set, I don't think it's confirmed yet, it does seem to be a bit extraordinary that you've got areas of high stock numbers and appropriate environment, which has got a lower limit set than perhaps areas where they'd be under pressure.
Look, one thing, and again, Dan may want to comment on this, but one thing I will say is certainly when we reduce or increase bag limits, certainly for the rec sector, that is based on very sound science, because we know if we get that wrong, we will be held to account, and sometimes in a court of law. So we do need to make sure that the science is right. So as Dan said, everything, science does underpin everything we do in this space, because we've got to ensure every decision has integrity.
Just a quick question. Obviously, Māori big stakeholders in fishing, aquaculture. I was just wondering if you could give us an update of how things are going with the Māori settlements and
Sure.
in both those areas.
So that, you know, as you know, Mr. Chittikani, probably better than I did, the 2004 Act, everything pre 2011 has been settled. In terms of post-2011 settlements, I think we've settled, and correct me again if I'm wrong here, Matt, with 6 of the 7 regions. We're also in consultation with BOP, Bay of Plenty and Waikato West, where initially we didn't think there was going to be aquaculture undertaken, but we have now determined that there can be aquaculture undertaken. So that is, consultation is being undertaken there. So I think we're in a really good space. When I became the minister, I did say that Te Ahu Kaimoana, they're not stakeholders, they are true treaty partners. And I try and attend all their board meetings. What I've said to Fisheries New Zealand is that every decision document, I would like that run past Te Ahu before it comes to me, because if we don't have buy-in from Te Ahu Kaimoana,